don't know. I don't know what all you can or can't see after the fact. So, and then I'm gonna share my screen. So bear with me. And as soon as you should be able to see the screen there. Somebody nod if you can. Great.
Yes.
All right. Let me figure one thing out right fast. Hang on one second. I lost my mouse. I can't see where my mouse is now. No, it's hang on. I got to stop sharing for 1 second. Let me do this again. Hang on, my apologies. I've got something done wrong. Let me do it one more time. Okay, now I got everything. You should be able to see that.
Yes.
Someone give me a nod if you can see it. Okay, we're in good shape. Well, hang on. My apologies. There we go. Now you should be able to see it. I think we're in good shape now. Hey, welcome everybody. Sorry for those mix-ups, but welcome everybody. I'm a little bit out of practice because last month I didn't do a webinar. I didn't talk a lot about it, but last month I spent the whole month in Botswana doing some workshops over there. It was a wonderful experience. Man, it's so neat to go somewhere like that where things are still so wild and you can see all kinds of wild animals, and just every day is something different. I mean, we saw the gamut of the things you expect to see. Elephants, which elephants are kind of a total special place in my heart. I just love those things. It's hard not to love an elephant. I tell people when we spend a little time with elephants, if that doesn't put a smile on your face, you've got to be dead inside. They're such special animals. The way they treat each other, it's just I never get tired of looking at them. Lions, cheetahs, leopards, hyenas, all the things you would expect to see when you go over there. But I think the best part, I always go to Botswana, and I love Botswana. I think the best part about going to Botswana is just the people there. The people are wonderful. They've got hospitality really, really dialed in. It's just a fantastic place to go and spend time at. And that's why I never get tired of going over there. And it's also, excuse me, it's also kind of fun because since I've been to Botswana so much, I'm starting to learn their language. Setswana is they speak two national languages, which is Setswana is one because there's 26 tribal languages spoken in Botswana, but school kids all learn two common languages. English is one, and then Setswana is the other one. And whenever so since I've been going so much, I'm starting to learn Setswana. Now I wouldn't say I'm fluent at it. I can speak probably like a 3-year-old can speak Setswana, so I can communicate a little bit, but it's always fun when I go over there and speak Setswana to someone who doesn't expect someone with such a thick Texas accent like I've got to be able to talk Setswana back to them. But with all that said and done, thanks again for joining me again on the reboot of these webinars. They'll always provide a lot of value, not only to me, but from the feedback I get to everybody else. Today's a special day for me too. It's my anniversary. I've been married 32 years today. We but to confuse our kids our daughter will turn 25 tomorrow, and our son is just turned 21 a couple of months ago. But to confuse our kids, we never tell them that we've been married for 32 years. We always tell them we've been married for like 15 years, just to kind of confuse them, mix things up a little bit and get them talking amongst themselves. But we've been married 32 years. Christy and I got married in 1993 when we were just youngsters, and it's been a good run ever since. So we're not only celebrating today with each other, I'm also celebrating with you guys today. But Again, thanks for being here. If you don't know me, my name is Russell Graves. I'm coming to you live from Hackberry Farm in Dodge City, Texas. It's kind of warmed up today, so if you see me start sweating, I'm sitting out here in the barn today. It's not air conditioning here, but it's getting warmer and warmer as we sit. So that way, it'll help me kind of get through this thing. And as we go through, the way I've got to do it on my platform is I can't see you now. I can only see my screen, and just to make sure I've got all the buttons pushed right, let me 1 second before I go any further. Let me make sure I've got, okay, it's all recording. And I can't see you because I've got everything turned off except the screen I'm looking at. So if you've got any questions as I go along, I'll have some question and answer time at the end. And at that point, you can, if you want to, you can turn your microphone on and speak directly to me. You can put stuff in the chat as we go along. But I usually try to make these dialogues instead of monologues as we go along, but because it is because of the limitations I have with how I'm having to do this and do it all by myself, it's just easier if I take questions in the end. So with that said, let's talk about taking wildlife and nature images for publication. And I don't always assume everybody knows everything about me and my background. So I'm going to share a little bit about me so you can kind of understand what makes me a little bit of an expert on this. For the past, I'm going to say, since, and I'll show you a story in a minute, since I was just a young guy, I've made at least some of my living, if not all of my living, as an editorial and commercial photographer. So long before I was leading workshops around the world, I made a pretty good living for taking pictures for editorial outlets like magazines and and things like that. I didn't really do much newspaper stuff, but mainly magazines. And then commercial photography, where I would get hired by companies to produce their material for either ad campaigns or in-store signage or whatever else they could dream up, website stuff, whatever. I did a lot of work like that in the past. And so I've got a lot of experience, especially in the magazine stuff. And I still really enjoy doing the magazine photography. And then I'm also a book and magazine writer. If you follow my newsletter, it makes my heart feel good when every month when I come out with my newsletter that people take the time to comment on the lead story that I usually put on there. I'll put photo tips and videos and announcements and everything else in that newsletter. But the thing that people always comment about is kind of my lead story. And so if I'm being honest about it, that was really my original talent, God-given talent I've always been blessed with the ability to tell stories and write really well. Just the whole mechanics of writing made sense to me. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later, kind of how that led me into photography. But I've written 7 books, I think, on various subjects. I've written probably had 1 million words published as a magazine writer. And so I still continue to do all this stuff today. Speaker, I used to do a lot more speaking before COVID. COVID kind of took care of a lot of my speaking part, but it's starting to come back now. And I'm talking about being a speaker for everything from camera clubs to chambers of commerce to state agencies who are having or organizations that are having their annual meeting, or for some reason that had me stand up in front of the whole crowd of anywhere from 20 people to 2,500 people and just tell stories from the back roads and things I've seen and experienced. And so it's been a lot of fun. In the past, I was an educator. I was taught in the public school system here in Texas at a small Texas Panhandle school. I did that for 16 years, left that career and didn't retire, but I left that career in 2009 to kind of pursue full-time of being a writer and a photographer. And then also a hobby farmer. In fact, when I get off this webinar, I'm going to go jump on the tractor for a few hours, catch up on a few things that I missed while I was gone, because it's starting to get to be fall planting season, and we always grow a few little patches of wheat around here, not only for wildlife, but also some we harvest later on in the year and use to bake bread and stuff like that. So also a hobby farmer. And all that means is I love farming, love the agricultural lifestyle. I just don't do it for a living. Plus it gives me an excuse to get on my tractor and drive around in circles. So my wife thinks I'm busy doing something. And then I always tell people this all applies to doing magazine photography. Even a blind pig can find an acorn every now and then. You may have heard that replace squirrel. I've heard it 2 or 3 different ways, but it's an old time rule saying I've heard my whole life. And what I mean by that is, if your goal is to get one picture in a magazine, there's no doubt one picture in one magazine one time. There's probably no doubt everyone either that's live listening in the audience now, or that may be uh, listening on the replay later on, or will listen to this 2 or 3 years from now. There's no doubt you can do that. But as part of this process today, we're going to talk about is defining your goals and kind of what you want to do. And I'm going to walk you through the process of sort of how the step-by-step process on how to go about talking to magazines and trying to get your work featured in magazines, and kind of the what I think are the do's and don'ts, the way you approach this whole thing, this whole subject. And but again, if your goal is to get one picture one time, we can probably almost all do that. But for me, and as part of how I sent my kids to college and put food on the table and paid for our house, paid our mortgage and all that stuff, it was more important for me to figure out to be a little more consistent, because I didn't want to find an acorn every one now and then. I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of acorns in every magazine in every single month, that so that way I'd have a pretty steady source of income on the magazine part of what I did, in addition to the other stuff I did. Because the one thing about being in business as a photographer is, especially when you're editorial and commercial photographer, like I used to really focus on, is there's no guarantee of your next paycheck. You had to, every day you'd have to go out and what I used to call leave the cave and go find, the food you're going to eat that day and bring it back to the cave. Every day I was doing that. And so it always helped me to have sort of a consistent source of income. And I found that in magazine photography for a lot of years. Full disclosure, I don't do as much as I used to, because my interest in my business is sort of shifted on what my focus is now, but I still do a fair amount of it. I mean, just about every month in several magazines, you can find my pictures in those magazines. And then as well as when magazines ask me to write for them too. And so I always like telling stories. If you've listened to me long enough, I'm full of stories, and they're all true. And so one story I want to tell you is how this whole topic we're talking about today, I'm 55 years old, but this whole subject started about 38 years ago. And and if you might have heard the story before, because I've relayed part of this, at least in the past. But a couple of years ago, when we were finishing up the barn here, and by the way, the barn is another building. We call it the barn, but it's not a true barn. It's another building on our farm here, and it's all finished space inside. As you can see, this isn't a virtual background. This is real wood. The wood right there is what is our pieces of trees that had to sacrifice their lives so we could build our house here. We got to cross a creek, so we had to cut down some trees crossing a creek so we could put a bridge in. So the cross section of those trees were to honor or from the trees that we had to cut down, and that was just to honor their sacrifice they gave for us to live here. So all this is finished space. And so anyway, when we were decorating for the barn, I'm going through a box of stuff we had packed away, and I forgot I kept it. But what I found was, what I found was this old research paper I wrote when I was in high school. And it's you can see there, English 3 research paper, 6 weeks. That's when I was a junior in high school. And the topic is wildlife photography. And I've been interested in it that long. And in this research paper, if you read it, it'll talk about doing what we're talking about today, how you approach magazines, how you get stuff in magazines and what it pays and all that stuff. And so you can see Miss Knight, my teacher, which by the way, when Miss Knight was my teacher in high school, when I was a junior, and I mean this with all due respect, I mean, I thought she was an old woman then. And then when my son went to high school at the same high school I went to, she was his English teacher, and she was right at the end of retirement. So me at 17 years old, I calculated one time, she was in her early 30s when she was my teacher. And so for some reason, I thought she was an old timer back then. But she told me there are footnotes belong at the end of the sentence, and the bibliography should have been in ink because I wrote it in pencil. But she said 95, did a very good job. And then if you look up in the corner, that's what I'm most proud of. Upper left corner, she gave me 100 for my stapling job. So that's what I'm pretty proud of. I don't know if you can see these blue lines on there. I don't know where they come from all of a sudden. But anyway, and for me, this is the magazine that got me interested in doing magazine photography. I remember this is May of 1987, end of my junior year. And I remember my dad brought that home from someone gave it to him at work, and he brought it home and he showed me a bunch of pictures in this magazine and said, when you start getting pictures in this magazine, you're really doing something. And so that was kind of my moment that he inspired me. I wanted to get pictures in magazines. And so right after that, I started packaging up my best material. I lived 8 miles from the post office out in the country. So I'd haul them into town down the gravel roads, and I went up to the post office and gave the postmaster my package and said, send these to Austin, Texas, the Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine. I'm about to be a big time magazine photographer. And those pictures were rejected so fast, they almost beat me back to the house in the return mail. So, but with the encouragement of my parents, I kept it up and I kept it up, and I became a student of the business of photography. And then I think this was in 1989. This is the first picture I ever had in a magazine, and it was of a mounted deer on the wall, but it was the story of that deer. So I wrote the story and took the picture, and I got paid. Hang on one second. Let me. There we go. I had actually accidentally drew on my screen. So anyway, I got one more. Sorry about that. So anyway, I remember being in Sherman, Texas at a Walmart with my brother, and I'm looking through this magazine and I get to this picture and I'm thinking to myself, I recognize that picture. And then and I started reading the story and I recognized that I know that I've read these words before, and it didn't dawn on me to look who wrote it. And I realized I wrote it. And that was the first time I'd ever been published before. And that was in 1989. I got a check for $73 for this work I did. I think it's about a 700 word story and this one picture. And it wasn't a lot of money, but the fact that I made money off that, and I thought to myself, if you can make money doing this, I am in. So from that point, I tell people a lot, people who care to ask, during my 20s, I really doubled down on learning two things. One, I learned how to get better with my camera and just be able to be consistent with the picture taking. Because again, that whole concept of even a blind hog can find an acorn every now and then, I wanted to check every month in the mail or every couple of weeks in the mail. That's how often I wanted. So I really spent my efforts in my 20s doing two things. One, getting better at photography, and two, probably most importantly, is getting better at the business of photography. And then once I was able to do that, the whole process became easier over time. And so, and this is my first cover. You can see that's in 1993. I was 20 years old. First magazine cover I ever had, Gulf Coast Cattleman. By the way, this magazine, and this is going to come back. This will have some relevance later on. The three magazines I'll show you: Texas Parks and Wildlife, the Journal of Texas Trophy Hunters, and then Gulf Coast Cattleman. And so my whole genre was all those things I was used to being around growing up, just the things I was most familiar with: agriculture, wildlife, everything I could see by walking out of my back door is what I kind of started with. And then so with that said, that kind of launched me to learning all the stuff we're going to talk about today. And so one of the questions I get all the time, aren't books and magazines dead? Well, that's what they've been saying since the advent of the internet back in the 90s. But the fact is, and what I can't wrap my mind around is, if you walk into a Barnes and Noble right now and you go to their magazine section, there may be more magazines on the rack than there ever has been. And so I think where the magazine business has changed, well, and even issues that even titles that you may know. For example, I just subscribed yesterday. Outdoor Photographer, that magazine went out of business several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago. I can't remember how long it was, but anyway, they're back in print now. So I subscribed yesterday. And so I don't think magazines and books are completely dead yet, because I think as long as people are just, at least an older generation like me, I like to hold stuff in my hands. I don't really like reading much off of a screen. I like reading short stuff off a screen, but if it's very long, I'd rather sit in a nice, comfortable chair and be able to flip through it and have that whole experience. And so, but what magazines have done is they've changed a little bit. So now, I think gone are the days of like Popular Photography where you've got gear reviews and it comes out once a month. I think those are gone because you can deliver that content more effectively and efficiently on the internet. But where I think there is still a niche, and I think this is where a lot of magazines are going to. One of the magazines I've contributed to for a long, long time is called Field and Stream, and you may have heard of that one before. But Field and Stream used to be a monthly magazine. It went out of print maybe 6 or 8 years ago. Well, it's back now as a quarterly magazine, but as a quarterly magazine, it's a lot bigger format. I mean, physically, it's a lot bigger magazine, and it's on a lot better paper than they used to print it on, a little fancier paper. It's got some texture to it. It's got a lot more content in it. And then they're really trying to double down on just the look of the magazine and really make it look nice. And so now I think where magazines are evolving to is they're becoming more of a less of a breaking news kind of thing. Cause again, you can do that quicker on the internet, and more sort of leaning into the experiential part of good stories, well-written stories, really nice photography, and just really good storytelling from front to back, really good design, top quality paper. I think they're evolving to that. And because of that, I still think there's opportunities for people to still be published in magazines. And so the opposite of I alluded to it earlier on the blind hog analogy, but to consistently get images published, it's a process. I do the same thing each and every time. And that's what I'm going to walk you through on this process. Still got a few people coming in. So if you're just now coming in, welcome. I'm trying to notice you as quick as I can and get you entered in here. And so on the process, I'll give you a brief explanation because this is kind of in general I'll talk about today. There's a few nuances depending on the publication you reach out to, but in general, this is a pretty good process on how it all sort of works. And so first thing I think I try to coach people on is decide what you want to do. Do you want to do stock photography, assignment photography, or do you want to do both? And I'll explain what those are in a minute if you don't know what those are. Essentially, stock photography is like a store, and your photos are your inventory. So whenever I go out on a workshop and I take a lot of pictures, I'll go back to those pictures and I think, okay, which one of these pictures have marketability beyond just the workshop? And so I'll go through and pick the pictures I like, do the post-processing I need to do to them. I'll keyword them. I'll do all this stuff. And then they go live on a website called russellgraves.com. Everyone comes through this portal through hackberryfarmtexas.com, but russellgraves.com is my business to business website that I have about 90,000 searchable images by keyword. And that's 25 years worth of work on that website. And so I've got all these images that are searchable by keywords, and I've got a slew of clients who they know if they're looking for a particular picture that doesn't have to be, if they're looking for a picture of a prairie dog, for example, they can go on my website, search prairie dog. I've got it set up with my trusted clients. They've got login credentials where they can go find the image they want and they can download it and they can download it and then use it on the composition they need. It's kind of it's a little bit of it's a little bit of a handshake agreement that we do because since they're a trusted client, I know they're going to pay me for it in the end, and they're going to pay me based on, the criteria in which they use it. I'll talk about that here in a minute. But anyway, and so it's like a store. When I get pictures in, I'll go through, find the ones I want, put them on that website, and they're just sitting in the store like inventory on the shelves, waiting for someone to come in and say, I want to use that one and download it. To kind of give you an idea of volume, back in the heyday, and I think I know what happened, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We'll talk about that in just the next thing I talk about. But I think in about I want to say about October 2019. And I say that because I've talked to other photographers who did the same thing I do, worked in the exact same genres and people I've become friends with. And they would talk about the same thing happened to them. So before October of 2019, if that was the date, let's just say that. Before then, it wasn't unusual for me to do 2 or 3 downloads a day. And 2 or 3 downloads don't sound like a lot, but then when you consider, it's kind of a minimum of $100 a download, and it's so $200 to $300 a day every single day of the year. That kind of adds up. It's a pretty good clicker. Now, since then, and I think the reason is multifold. One, the rise of the micro stock agencies. And what I mean by micro stock are these sites that you can go and buy stock images for $1 or 50 cents or whatever that is. I don't do that. I don't participate in that thing because one of the reasons is I kind of want to be paid more than that. So I put a value on my work, and then I stick. So my model that I do is a rights managed model. So what that means is that when someone dealt with this a couple of days ago, someone wanted a picture for a cover of a magazine, and so they asked me 2 questions: has this image been published before? Which told them no, which is the truth. And then number 2, once they use it for the cover, then that picture gets embargoed for a month where no one else can use it until that month term is up, and then it can go back in the inventory and get used. So, but with that rights managed model, I feel like I can ask more money for that, because with that micro stock and that royalty free photography, a magazine, if they bought one picture for their cover, theoretically that same picture could be on 20 different magazines in the same month, because they don't use it however you want to, and they don't license that. So I've never really gave into that. I probably never will, just because, again, I mean, I'd rather not do anything with my images at all than help degrade the marketplace where, I'm selling my pictures for $5 a piece or whatever. And so, but I think the rise of micro stock hurt to some degree. I also think me kind of starting to shift my business focus from more of a commercial and editorial to just doing more kind of experiences and learning based sort of workshop business. I quit sort of pushing my stock site as much. And then I think the third thing is just the changing face through COVID of the magazine industry and the consolidation of a lot of magazines. Once people started going out of business and people started losing jobs, I've just never done a really good job of going in and re-engaging with new people, because I'll explain in a minute how it works. But behind every decision that's made about photography, there's a person behind it. And if you don't keep up with who that person is, you fall behind. And I think those three reasons is why my stock photography has went down some. I'm going to say now it's not nothing, but I'm going to say now I went from about 2 to 3 downloads a day to now maybe a download every other day. But again, I think 2/3 of that's probably my fault than external things. Assignment photography, that's where a magazine or a client will call on you to say, we want to get pictures of this, whatever this is, and we want you to go out and shoot pictures of it like that. And that's a kind of a whole different mindset that you've got to do on assignment photography than stock. With stock, you're just trying to shoot pictures. I'll show you some examples in a minute. You're just trying to shoot pictures that you think will fit a marketplace at some other point. With assignment photography, I'm reading someone else's story that they wrote, and I'm trying to match the pictures that I'm going to go out and take to the story that was wrote. So that way, when it's when the people at the magazine lay it all out, it's kind of a cohesive look between the words that are printed on the page and the pictures that go along with it. So assignment photography is a little bit harder to get, because a lot of that comes with trust. They've just got to trust that you're going to go out and get the pictures they need. And so, but that's, again, decide if you want to do stock photography, assignment photography. The bottom line is it all takes a little bit of work. And so ultimately getting pictures published, it boils down to this: it's a business. And it's, and I encourage people, if you're interested in doing this, you got to think about it like a business. And like any business, I mean, so a couple of people are in the audience now. I know what they did for a living, and I know, and whatever people do for a living, there's processes within that business that you got to do the same thing each and every time to kind of keep things on the rails. And that's how doing it for doing it for some sort of side income, or doing it for a living, or anything, at some point it becomes a business. And I hear a lot of people say, and this is fair, that, they never wanted to ruin their love of photography with making it a business. I enjoy photography a lot, but I enjoy the business side of it a lot too. I really like the challenge of going out and trying to get places to use my pictures. Now, for me, I don't enter contests. For me, that's my contest: is can I beat out all the competition for them to use my pictures, whether inside the pages of a magazine or on the cover of a magazine? And it's something that I've had tens of thousands of images published in my lifetime, probably 600 magazine covers in my lifetime. And I still get a kick out of every time I see my name that says cover by Russell Graves, or if I see my name underneath a picture in a magazine, I still get a kick out of seeing that. So it's something I love both sides of it. And so, but you got to wrap your mind around that it is a business. And so here's how the business works in a nutshell. I alluded to this a couple of minutes ago. Each publication has a decision maker, and they go by a lot of names depending on the magazine. They may be called art director, photo editor, creative director, or whatever else. But someone in that magazine makes a decision each and every month when it comes to the pictures they're going to use, the photographers are going to work with, if they're going to send you out on assignment, and all the other details. Now, it's a putting together a magazine is a collaborative process, but the gatekeeper is usually a photo editor. And so they'll take your pictures, they'll lay it out, and they'll show it to everybody else when they have their monthly roundup on finalizing the layouts of a magazine. They'll all sit around, the editor, the executive editor, all the people that are involved in the magazine will sit around and look at all the pages and make any comments that they want to, and a lot of times I know this with cover selection, they'll have 4 or 5 covers mocked up, and they'll just kind of have an internal vote, which one do we like the best, and that's what they go with. So, but the gatekeeper is usually goes by one of those names. So that's who you need to figure out who it is. And then also publications have a schedule where their product is being planned, the product meaning the magazine or whatever, and the production months, and they often work out a year or more in advance. And so whenever, for example, if I'm taking pictures of white-tailed deer this winter, there's a pretty good chance those won't show up for another year. Because again, they all have to have lead time, especially if they've got because they're printing magazines and they're putting them in the mail and they're doing all that, and they're trying to plan at least 3 or 4 months in advance. And so you just need to understand that. I don't think I've got this in here, but I'll say, if you want to find who the creative director are, the art director, anything else, inside the front pages of a magazine, usually 1 or 2 pages deep, there's a little side thing that's called a masthead. And in that masthead, it lists who the editor is, who you got to call for subscription services, who the photo editor is. That's got all those names listed. And so sometimes they make it easy, sometimes they don't, but you go to their website and you try to find someone's email address, and you can ask them, and I'll tell you the exact language you look for in a minute. You ask them to put you on their list if they will, but sometimes it's easier said than done on connecting with the right person. But that's still a valuable step you got to do, is identify who the decision maker is and try to start a dialogue with the decision maker. But again, understand they've got a publication schedule, that you can't take a picture today and say, oh, this is going to be a great picture for your magazine next month, because next month magazine got finished up 2 or 3 months ago. And then here's what you ask for. Some publications send out wants list each month, and they'll tell you what the pictures they're looking for. There's like that Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine I mentioned earlier. They send out, if you can get on their list, I'll get an email every month that says, okay, we're working on the January 26th issue right now. Here's the stories that are coming up in that issue. These are the pictures we're looking for. And if you've got pictures you think will match, then you go through your library and you find the pictures that match. And each magazine's different, but they will give you detailed ways that if you want to submit pictures, here's how you do it. And so one of the things you do when you find out who the photo editor is, you reach out to them and ask them for their submission guidelines on what the protocol that they follow for trying to get work in their magazine. Now, it can get maddening where you're trying to work with, 20 different magazines and you're trying to follow 20 different submission guidelines. But truthfully, that's how I got started. Now, after a while, when you kind of prove your worth, then I started doing something different. And I got lucky because I was one of the first people to do this. I created this russellgraves.com website where instead of them asking me for pictures, they could just go on my website whenever they wanted to and download pictures. And so essentially I was making their job easier, which is why that whole website did so well for so many years, is because they could go at will. They didn't have to wait on people to send pictures in, or if they got a submission in that wasn't up to snuff, they could go look at my website and maybe find something that worked there. And then one thing you need to know is various publications have varying pay scales. It's typically the bigger the publication, the more circulation they have, the higher the pay is going to be. If you're trying to do a little regional magazine that's, details lake life around where you live and you're wanting to do a story for them, the pay is usually not much for something like that. But if you're trying to get into a magazine, which is, the bigger the magazine, the harder they are to get into. Like, I've never been published by National Geographic. I've never tried, but because, it was easier to pick the low hanging fruit than to go for something like that all these years. And so with that said, a magazine like National Geographic may pay the most. And so just understand that that's another thing that they'll send you to, is once they send their submission guidelines, a lot of time they'll send their pay scales outlining what they pay for covers, what they pay for the different sizes of the magazine and everything else. So pretty straightforward the way it works. And then pay is often, if they're just buying stock photos, is often based on the size and the placement of the image as it appears in the publication. So in other words, if it appears on the cover, that's kind of the premium spot, and that's what they're going to pay the most for. If it's a quarter page image or an eighth of page image on page 32, that's the lowest paid stuff. And so from the cover to the smallest image is kind of the extremes, and then everything else sort of fans out in between there. A half page image is worth more than a quarter page image. A full page image is worth more than a half page image. A double page spread is worth more than a full page image. And so usually the more real estate it takes up on the page, the more you get paid for it. And I'm being really vague about the pay because it really does. It really does vary from magazine to magazine on what people pay. So, and so you just got to get their pay scales and find out if it works for you. And one thing I always advise people is don't accept a contract from a magazine for unlimited usage or ever give up your ownership rights, because there'll be I see it a lot more in photo contests, because I think photo contests pick on amateurs who don't know any better. Because I think the same magazine, there's one, I'm not going to name them, but there's one magazine in particular I think about that runs an annual photo contest, and they say, okay, if you're a winner, we own this image forever. We can use it however we want to from in perpetuity, and we don't owe you another dime. But that same magazine wouldn't do the same thing if they were working for someone like me, and you had a image on the cover. They use that one image that 1 month, and then it's the rights are still yours. And any kind of ancillary rights after that, where they want to use it again, then they pay you additionally for that for that other usage on that image. And so that's why I tell people don't accept a contract for unlimited usage, because essentially, even though you still own the image, theoretically they could use it on their cover every month from now till the end of time. And if they paid you that one time and then you accepted unlimited usage, you get no more money out of it. So that's where it starts becoming a business. And then, like I say here, the best publications only lease an image for a specified term, the ones I like to work with best. And that's what I mean by best. The ones that are most photography friendly recognize that I'm trying to make a living. Other people like me are trying to make a living. And so they're only going to do deals with you where they're going to lease that image. They're not going to own it. They're just going to use it for a specified amount of time. And once that lease, and I put that in quotes because they don't call it that, it's usually called usage terms. Once that lease has expired on the image, then you can use it however you want to after that. And if they want to use that image again, then they pay you additionally for it. A couple of ninja birds in Botswana. And so here's the secret sauce to all of it. It's not really that complicated in the end. It's kind of a wash, rinse, and repeat mentality. It's the same thing. If you've ever been on a workshop with me, it's the same thing I talked about photography. Most photography you'll ever do, landscape or wildlife, it's famously uncomplicated. You just got to know what to do and just do the same thing each and every time. And that's how this is the secret sauce to this. And so here's the one thing you need to know. Composition matters in the end. If you're not real good with composition and you want to have pictures published, I'd encourage you to get better at it. And I'll show you why composition matters in a minute, because you're in the business of, again, working in a collaborative project like a magazine where you've got someone else who's laying out the stuff on the page. You may have someone else who's writing the article, and you've got several people working on the same page. Composition kind of matters, and a variety of composition matters as well. So in other words, I would avoid putting stuff right in the middle of the frame. Try to adhere to some sort of rule of thirds. It's kind of a loose rule of thirds, but I'll talk about that as we go along. So as you shoot verticals, I know digital photography and the ability to crop has really ruined people's not ability, their willingness to shoot verticals for some reason, or portrait orientation. I still shoot them a lot because I think it's best to have a variety of both portrait and landscape oriented pictures. But when you shoot verticals, you should leave it a little loose. Should have space for text, especially if you want it considered for a magazine cover. I'll show you some examples here in a minute. And then horizontals, I shoot both loose and tight to give some variation for an art director. And so this picture right here has been in the magazine a couple times. Once it was a double page spread, kind of like you see right now. And then the second time they actually cropped it and it was used as a cover. So because it was loose enough composed where they had room for text, and that's super important. Picture like this, same way. You know, this has been in the double page spread in a magazine before because it gives plenty of room. When I was composing it, it gave plenty of room out in front of the animal, kind of dead space, out of focus space, where it's easy to lay text on top of something like that and it'll stand out on the text. Same way with this one. You can see, you know, if someone was doing an article called Coyote Country, you got plenty of space up in the upper left is a counterpoint to the coyote to kind of balance the composition. And that red line there is what I put as kind of a, if they wanted to use it for a double page spread, that's where the whole page would split. And that gives an art director plenty of options. And I know this works because this picture has been laid out just like this before in a magazine. And so it gives them plenty of options to lay the text. And in the end, when you take pictures for magazines, that's one of the thoughts in my head all the time is if I want them to use my pictures, I need to make it easy for them to use my pictures. I don't need to put a lot of work on the people who are making the decisions, the art directors. It just needs to kind of come easy for them. They need to look at that picture and think, oh, I'm glad he put that in there. That's going to be easy to lay out on top of. Because if they've got to do any work at all, I think it hurts your chances of having pictures published. And so this whole formula I'm talking about, it's a wash, rinse, and repeat mentality. These same things I do them each and every time. I think detail shots are important too, because detail shots, you'd be surprised. Now, this one's never been published because I've never worked on an article about elephants before, but you'd be surprised how many detail shots I've taken of things like a bobcat tail or the tips of a white-tailed deer antlers, or just detail shots that art directors really seem to like, and they'll find a place to put pictures like this because they're so unusual. Here's kind of a mock-up of a cover. This is why I say shoot loose. So this is how a typical cover, and this, not this exact picture, but a picture in the same series has been on the cover, and this is how they lay it out. So you got to have plenty of room up top. And again, that background, if you notice, really, really out of focus. That's all part of the formula too. Really out of focus. So when they put words on top of it, it's not a busy, busy background, and the words clearly stand out. But so what they want is room for the name of the magazine, the month it's being published, and then they've got that little deal down on the bottom we've all seen before, which is the address label. You got to have room there so it doesn't stand in the way. And then they want to have room to kind of call out in this issue what all is going to be there. And that's a pretty typical magazine cover layout. And so when you start thinking about shooting a little loose and then, you know, giving a little space at the top, giving a little space on the side, that's the reason why when you start shooting like that. And so here's another example, another Quail Monthly, June 2004, address label in this issue. That's if you don't know, that's called a scaled quail, or some people call it blue quail. That's why So Blue is on there. That's my poor attempt at humor. Anyway, that's the way it all kind of lays out. And then let me back up. And even like this coyote shot, you can see there when you shoot something loose. I mean, that picture right there would never win a contest. Never would. Coyote standing still. It's, you know, it's pretty loose in the picture. It's not really tight close up. You can see a little bit of detail in his face, a lot of blue sky, but that blue sky is important because of right there when they start laying it out. So it's a different mentality of thinking composition in a little in a small kind of way, but it's just kind of a process. Again, one of the things I'm trying to do is when a magazine sees if they're trying to do a story about quail or grassland birds or whatever else, when they see that picture, it's a no-brainer to use it on the cover just because they know, oh gosh, you got plenty of room for all the elements we need. It's just easy to do, and we don't have to work. We don't have to go in and do any extra work to the image, crop it, or do a generative expand to the canvas. We don't have to do any of that stuff. We can use it as is, which time is money. And the less time they spend doing something, the happier they are, because magazine people like me and you like to get off work when it's time to get off work and go home when it's time to go home. And movies like The Devil Wears Prada make it seem like magazine work is pretty glamorous. And I guess in a way it can be, but all the magazine people I've ever worked with, they're like me and you. They just got a job they go to and they love their job and they're passionate about it. But at the end of the day, you know, it is a job, and they want to be able to do it as efficiently and correctly as they can. And so one of the things I always do when I go out to give some variations, I think there's 3 shots that are winners in the end, and that I try to do on every animal I take. And those 3 shots are, I call it the yearbook shot. It's a picture of that animal, for example, that you can identify it and you know what it is. We know this is a wild turkey. And so that's the yearbook shot. And so, by the way, if you look at how I compose this picture, also be used as a cover if they decided to use that as a cover as well. It's got plenty of space around it where that would work. Number two thing I do is environmental portrait. And what that means is like the coyote shot I showed you earlier. It's just a looser shot of the animal showing more of the environment in which it lives. So, this picture, I could have had a tighter shot of this turkey in the field, but you just could tell it was standing in the grass. You wouldn't get a very good sense of sort of what it looks like around it. And so shot one, the yearbook shot. Shot number two, the environmental portrait, I think is really, really important to do. And then shot number three is action shots, shots of the animal doing something that's indicative with the animal. And that could be any number of things, a bird flying or a turkey gobbling or a deer feeding or doing something, some kind of action shot besides just standing there. So those three pictures is what I try to present every time I present pictures to a magazine, whether I shoot on assignment or if they ask specifically for stock, I try to present them these three shots to give them a variety of something they can work with. And then I'm going to leave this up for a second. If you want to, I've got a video on my YouTube channel about called Three Shots, kind of walk through in a little more detail and talk about it a little more, but I'll leave that up on there if you want to scan that QR code. Or like I'd mentioned before, if you registered for the webinar, when it's over, you'll get a recap of the meeting notes as well as a replay of the video. And when you go back and watch the video, you can go click on that as well and watch that video. And then I also approach my subject like I'm a movie director. I mean, I think when I'm taking pictures, and I coach this a lot too, when we're in the field, I'll tell people you got to figure out who's the star of your show. And once you figure out who the star of your show, that's where the best light and the best exposure needs to be on. So I think like a movie director. And when I do, I think of three shots. Every movie you've ever watched or TV show are made up of three standard shots. They're made up of a close-up shot, a wide-angle shot, and then a kind of a mid-range shot. So I'll do a standard shot of the animal, nothing fancy, just the animal being the animal. And then again, I'll do a shot that shows a wide shot that shows the environment. Sometimes the wider, the better. You can see this lone bison, which was taken I'm a little bit commercial here on my Redlands Ranch Wildlife Experience workshop that's coming up in a couple of weeks. We go to a place with a lot of bison, and that was shot on a beautiful morning with the sun filtering through the clouds. And even though we were pretty close to the bison, I thought a really wide sweeping kind of opening scene of Dances with Wolves kind of shot would be appropriate for this, because at this point the bison is the star of the show, but the sky is kind of the star of the show too. So you got two people playing together in this scene, and so I thought they were both important. And then I usually try to include some kind of close-up shot when I can and if it's appropriate. And I see some chats coming through, so I'll get to those here in a little bit as we get off this PowerPoint presentation. We get to the Q&A section. And then this is showing an example, a detail shot there of the legs. That's what happens when you've taken all the turkey pictures that you can think of and can't think of anything else. He was actually too close to photograph because he was right in front of my blind. And so I decided I'm just going to take pictures of his legs. Believe it or not, that's been in the calendar before. Those legs were like Mr. March one year in a turkey calendar that came out with the publication that I've done some shooting for in the past. And then again, just you can see, since I kind of spelled out sort of the compositional things that I think about when we do these pictures of how everything lays out, you can see they start laying out for a reason after a while. And all of these could be cover contenders. They haven't. This one hasn't been on the cover yet. That one's been in a magazine, but it hadn't been on the cover yet. But you can still see as I compose, you always try to leave a little bit of room at the top. And so the whole game is formulaic on how you shoot pictures and how you compose and how you think about it. But again, what I said earlier in regards to the steps, figuring out who the decision maker in the magazine is, and then figure out do they have a wants list. The worst thing you can do, and I didn't mention this earlier, is just send in a bunch of random pictures. They might not look at them, because they don't have time to do it. Really, what you want to try to hone in on are finding those wants list, figuring out what's coming up in the magazine that year, and then trying to match your photography to what their wants are. And sometimes they'll have an all call and just say, send us whatever. But for the most part, they've got a pretty tight editorial schedule and they know what's coming up a year from now. And if you can match pictures of that, you really increase your percentage of pictures. Now, a few takeaways: mundane pictures are good to have. I've got on that russellgraves.com, I've got tens of thousands of pictures on there. I'm not going to say every one of them are winners. Not all of them are going to be cover worthy. Not all of them are going to be, couldn't win the Fannin County Fair photo contest. But what they are is they're good illustrative photos. I was talking to someone about this subject this morning. I've got maybe one of the largest collections outside of a university. I may have one of the largest private collections of plant life species in the country. I mean, I just love plants, love trees, love everything that grows from the ground. And so I've got this huge library of images that are of just grass and forbs and weeds and trees and all kinds of stuff, just where you can identify it. And that's not really kind of sexy from a mountain gorilla sort of standpoint. But a couple of years ago, a big national conservation organization contacted me because they said they heard about my plant collection and they wanted a picture of a specific species of grass for the cover of their annual report. And so I had it, and it was a mundane picture, but I took it anyway. And I had it because I've always had this idea that from a stock photography standpoint, if you don't have an inventory, you can't sell it. So I take pictures of everything. Even when I'm not doing a workshop, I just take pictures of, if it's a good picture, I'll try to take it. And that way I have the inventory built up. But so mundane pictures are good to have too. They don't all have to be just winners. A good thing too is read plenty of back issues of the publication that you want to submit to get a feel for what they use. If it's Texas Parks and Wildlife Magazine, for example, I showed that one earlier on. They're not going to use a picture of, no matter how good it is, they're not going to use a picture of a squirrel monkey from Costa Rica or a mountain gorilla from Rwanda. It's just not going to happen. And so read plenty of their back issues. It used to be hard to do that, but now it's relatively easy if you've got a internet connection, or sometimes if you ask, can you send me a few back issues? They'll do that for you too, and get a feel for kind of what they use. And sort of every magazine has a style too, and kind of what their style is. And then if you're going to try to make a lot of money, or consistent, not a lot of money, but a consistent income with stock photography, you just got to have a lot of images on file. I mean, you may have, if you had, I would argue to bet, and I'm not a betting man, but I would venture to guess that if you had 100 really, 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 really top-notch pictures of various landscapes and animals from around the country, maybe the best pictures that exist of any of that stuff. And then if I had 100,000 pictures of just, they're kind of mundane. A lot of them are, but there's some winners in there, but most of them are just fairly average pictures. Because I've got the bigger library, I'm going to make a more consistent income off that bigger library because, not every picture is going to use pictures of a Swabbacher's Landing in the Grand Tetons every month, or a white-tailed deer in your backyard every month. So to make a consistent income, you got to have a lot of images on file, and that takes time. And it's one of those things that when you set out to do it, if you're consistent with it, you'll have that big file later on. This is something that surprises people when I share this with them. The less post-processing, the better. And because I'm going to get on a little bit of tangent here, but it'll make sense, and bear with me. We're going to run over time, but that's fine. I'll stay with you as long as you want to get everybody's questions answered. The pinch point for everybody in photography now that shoots digital images is the post-processing part. It's easy to go out. I'm not gonna lie to you. When I was in Botswana for last month in August, I took 97,000 pictures while I was there. And so you can see 97,000 pictures. It's going to take a while. It doesn't take me long because I've got a video about that, how to speed up your post processing. So it took me about 4 nights, a couple hours a night to go through all those images and get them broken down now to where they're ready for the next step, which is just my final picks and put them on my website, which that won't take too long. But anyway, since we know that's the pinch point is the post-processing, why don't we all need to do a better job of trying to get it right in the camera? And so because of that, because I'm trying to get all my pictures right as bright as I can in the field and where I don't have to post-process them, uh, then I don't. And so, and along those lines, what surprises people to hear is when it comes to the magazine stuff, if there's any post-processing decisions that need to be made, it's usually the magazine that wants to make them because they've got an idea in their head on sort of the look of that magazine and the feel and what they want to do with the picture. And so usually what I do is almost always turn in JPEGs. And usually what I do is kind of take just a pretty standard exposure, get it close, little minimal post processing, and give it to them. If they want to do more post processing, they make that decision on the other end. And that's not Russell not knowing how to post process. I certainly do, but the less post processing, the better, because it just, it goes back to mundane pictures are good to have. If it's not a crazy looking picture and you're not trying to do a black and white or something like that with it, they can make those decisions if they want it black and white. It's best to present it as lifelike as possible and let them make any decisions beyond that. And then I say credits aren't what they are cracked up to be because I have learned that the only people that really look at magazine credits are other photographers. And so any magazine that's going to say, "Oh, we'll give you credit," uh, I can say this with 100% certainty: credit will hardly ever help your business go beyond that. And so, because nobody or not that many people really look at credits, and if they look at them, they don't remember who took the pictures. And believe me, I know that because after all these pictures I've had published, yeah, there's some people who kind of know what I do. But for the most part, I'm not a celebrity, even though I may be over the past 20 years, I may be one of the most published photographers there is in Texas, but I'm unknown to people just because people don't look at credits. What's important to me to stress this is if a magazine finds your pictures worthy of using, they ought to pay you for it, because if they don't pay you for it, you're the only one in the whole organization that's not being paid, because the person making that decision is getting paid for their services. The paper they're using to print the magazine on, they're not, no one will go to like a printing company and say, "Hey, Acme Printers, we'll give you a credit for your printing if you'll just give us this printing for free." I mean, people would be crazy to do that. Or just like you can't go into a Best Buy and say, "Hey, Best Buy, I'll give you a credit on my pictures for this computer and monitor if you just give it to me free." Everybody gets paid. And so because everybody gets paid, it's important to just understand that, yeah, credits are nice, but credits will not help you with your business if you're trying to grow it. So it's from the very jump, the very first picture you have published, it's best just to ask to get paid for it. And if it helps you out, so be it. But chances are, uh, all the credit is just your name beside a picture. And so, and I jokingly tell people I'd rather have my name on a check than my name beside a picture because I know who took it. That's good enough for me. And so just beware of the whole, credits are good for exposure because they're really not. And that sounds pretty cynical for me to say. I don't mean it to be. It's just the truth. And then more takeaways continued. One thing that helped me out a lot early on was learn to take pictures of people. And I don't mean people, depending on the genre you want to be in. I don't mean people like, I've never done family portraits. I've never done weddings or anything like that. But I mean people like enjoying the outdoors. Once I started putting pictures of people in my images, then and could do a convincing job of it, then my value as a photographer for magazines and commercial clients went way, way up because all of a sudden I could make scenes, people identify with people. And, if you're doing a story about your local state park and it's just all nature subjects, if you take the time to include people and the people look believable in the scene, they're wearing appropriate clothing and they're doing activities that are appropriate to what would be done in that national park. Those pictures of people are always going to sell. A beautiful picture of a waterfall, there may be 500 of them, but pictures of people dressed nice that are well composed and well exposed in outdoor activities, those are a lot rarer. And so if you can learn to take pictures of people in outdoor settings or whatever kind of magazine you're going for, it helps you a whole lot in being able to get published and get published consistency. And then I think too, it's important to figure out a good photo organizational scheme. I've got a video about that one too, where I kind of lay out how I organize pictures. I've got about 1 million pictures now in my Lightroom library, just shy of 1 million. And I'm telling you, I can find just about any picture in that entire library in just a couple of minutes. And so figuring out a good organizational scheme is important, because when a magazine reaches out and says, here's what we're looking for February of 26, and here's our deadline, a lot of times you've got like a week to get them in. If you've got a good organizational scheme and you want to try to submit pictures of that, it just makes more sense where you can go find those pictures and turn them in quick. And so usually the early bird gets the worm on those kind of things, because if you're past the deadline, they're probably not going to, unless it's a picture of Bigfoot and a UFO and an alien together, they'll probably pass on your picture, because there's plenty of good pictures out there. So since the early bird gets the worm, the minute the photo wants show up, if you can turn around and find the pictures that are appropriate, get them turned back in, that's always helpful. And so that's why I say figure out a good photo organizational scheme where you can find your images quickly and efficiently. And then that's that wash, rinse, and repeat. If you can do that every single month, and you're putting more pictures in front of decision makers, then by osmosis and in all practical terms, you're going to get more pictures. Your picture's going to be seen more often, and they're going to get picked more often. And then learn to write. I alluded to this earlier. That was my real skill early on. I had an early mentor of mine told me this a long time ago, because when I first started trying to get in pictures in magazines, I was doing it every now and then. And then when my early mentor says, do you know how to write? And I'm like, well, actually, I'm pretty good at writing. And they said, start writing stories. And that way you write stories in a way that it makes a magazine easier for you to use your pictures, because you can describe some things about, what's going on in the story that your picture will match up perfectly with. And so I thought, well, that sounds good. And so once I started pitching stories to magazines, I went from getting a few pictures published to a lot of pictures published to, at some point, I became known, I think, at least in my mind, at least this is the feeling, I became known more for magazines as a photographer than I was as a writer, even though I would still write from time to time. And so magazines started using my pictures for other people's articles, not just my own. And so that's when it kind of, the volume of the business picked back up, is once I learned to write and I started submitting a lot of pictures, all of a sudden magazines saw value in not only my writing, but my photography. And they started using me a lot more as a photographer as well. And then diversify. My diversity is I specialize in rural subjects. So if you can do it legally in the country, that's what I take pictures of. It may be agriculture, farming, ranching, which includes people in the pictures, as well as livestock and crops and all that stuff. A lot of my commercial work was in the outdoors industry, hunting and fishing company. So there was a time, if you went to stores like Gander Mountain or Outdoor Life or Cabela's, you'd see my pictures in those stores or on their catalog, stuff like that. And so that was a lot of what I did. And, and just all those magazines, they're kind of within that genre, that that rural lifestyles sort of umbrella, whether it's ag magazines or companies or hunting and fishing or general outdoors or even travel, rural destinations, hiking, all kinds of, just anything outdoors you can do in rural areas. That's what I did. So that was the way I diversified. And then set goals for your portfolio. I did that early on. I would look at the wants list, and I would really study them from different magazines and say, they keep asking for pictures of plants, for example. And, so I don't have any pictures of plants. Well, they're all around me. So I set a goal. I'm going to build a big plant portfolio. So I would do it. And, when I wasn't doing work for hire, when I just go out taking pictures, practicing the craft, I'd take pictures of plants. That's how I grew such a big library of them. Same way with white-tailed deer, or same way with anything else. The longer you kind of study the business, you start seeing gaps on what people need and what people want. And so that kind of gave me a way to set goals for my portfolio and grow in a way I could grow, and then be able to, again, produce a product that would be in demand later on. And then this is the big advice I give everybody. This is how I did it, and it seems to make most sense. Start with the local or regional publication. They're all around us. It's best just to start with those guys, and then go from there. And because it's a lot easier to get a cover of, your local Lake Life magazine than it is to try to get a cover on National Geographic. And so start locally and regionally, and as your reputation grows and your skill set grows and your portfolio grows, then you can start branching out to more, regional, statewide publications, national publications, and even international publications. There's been a lot of international publications that I've done work for as well. So it's, but it all starts with starting local or regional. That Texas Trophy Hunters magazine, the first picture I had ever, and the first story I ever had in a magazine, I don't know, probably had a circulation of 50,000, 75,000 people. Not a big magazine, but it's just specific to Texas. Gulf Coast cattlemen, even a tinier audience than that. But they had a need, they paid for that need, and so that's kind of what all gave me the start. So I would encourage you to start with local and regional publications. I know we got some questions, so we're gonna let me get past a couple more slides to just share with you, and then I'll turn the slideshow off, and then we'll go for the questions from there. So I know some people have some questions for me. Stay in touch. There's my email address, russell@russellgraves.com. If you want to go check out the other side I've referenced a few times, if you haven't seen it, there it is. I mean, you can look in the upper right-hand corner of the website, and you can search images by keyword, and you can see how that whole system works on how people can find pictures and download what they need. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, which I suspect you are because you signed up for the newsletter, but if you're not, and I also put that for, I don't know, once I post this to YouTube, I don't know who all is going to be looking at it, but once it gets posted, if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, it comes out once a month. You got a lot of good information in there. So please subscribe. So with that said, let me turn that off. Still got everybody with me. Let me look at the chats. And like I said, if you got a question you want to ask, you can either put it in the chat or unmute your microphone before you ask, so I can hear you. Oh, clicked on the QR code, got the message that the QR code has been deactivated. Huh. Okay. So that was the two quotes. Those are the two things there. So I'll do this whenever I send y'all out, since you registered for the webinar, whenever I send out the replay, I'll put the link in. I checked that this morning and it worked, and I don't know, just things happen, I guess. I will share that with everybody in the replay. I mean, when I send you the replay later on, I'll share that video with you. So does anybody have any questions at all about anything?
I had a question. You mentioned using
I think
people.
you're muted. You muted. Or I can't hear you, Randy.
Okay. Okay. Whoops. I may have lost it.
Hang on one second.
There you are.
Okay. Am I on now?
Yeah, you might check your.
I can hear you.
Okay. If you can hear me, if not, I'll email this to you.
Maybe that's me. Let me check mine right quick. Oh, yeah, it is me. Okay, let's try now, Randy.
Okay. Do the people that you're using, do you need to have a release to use that photo?
It's always helpful. I'm not an attorney when I say this, but some, magazines hardly ever will ask me, but to be fair, the people I'm using are usually people I know. So
yeah,
there's that. I'm not taking pictures of strangers. Some will, some won't, but usually for editorial purposes, and this is where I'm not an attorney, so you might seek some counsel. But if I'm in Caprock Canyon State Park, for example, and it's going in Texas Parks and Wildlife Magazine, that's kind of considered like a newspaper. It's editorial. So you got a lot more leeway on needing model releases when you do stuff like that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would say 85%, I'd say 90% of the time in my life when I've taken pictures of people for magazines, I've never been asked for a release. But again, I'm not taking pictures of strangers either. Usually it's, I tell people that for a long time, I'd use my kids as models because homemade models work pretty cheap. And so I would take them out and use them and my wife for pictures. And so because of that, I never really worried about it, and I wasn't asked for releases anyway. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I know that someone had their hand raised and I called on them to speak, but I don't know. I don't see who that was now. Oh, Ramel. So.
Yes, hi.
Okay, hey.
I just wanted to thank you for validating what I was thinking. I'm somewhat new to photography, as far as using the so-called real camera. And so I bought a camera, it's probably been a year and a half ago, and I literally went out every single day and shot photos of birds in flight and birds in general. And I like what you said about not giving your photos away, because there were some contests. And a lot of my friends and strangers encouraged me to try for, but I don't like just the idea of me giving you my product and exactly what you stated. You can use it forever and ever, and maybe I'll get something and maybe I won't. But even what they were offering, oftentimes they don't offer anything. But just the fact that you validated, nothing is free. So even cutting my teeth and everything. I just don't think it's fair that they want you to give them your work.
Yeah,
So
and
valid.
and that's a good point. I talk about that a lot. I try not to sound preachy about it, and I try not to sound holier than thou about it. But the truth is, when you think about it, everybody in every organization is getting paid something to be there, and the fact that they'll try to pick on. I don't mean this in a bad way. I just can't think of a better word. But then they try to pick on photographers, especially new photographers, vanity to say, "Oh yeah, we'll feature this picture," but you got to give it to us, and we're not going to pay anything for it. I just think that's just a dishonest way of doing business. Is what
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And
I
thank you
think.
so much for this wonderful.
Even like me, like I don't have a big budget, but I do. Like last year, for example, I did a year in review. And you can see it on online. Uh, I did a year in review with all the workshops we did in 2024, and I'm about to start production on 2025, where my words were used to describe each trip that we did. But I reached out to all the photographers who traveled with me and solicited their photos. And even with my limited budget, I still gave them something of value in the end. I mean, I paid them a little something for their efforts, and it was all. And I let them know what the deal was gonna be beforehand. They could opt out. No one had to turn in pictures, but the ones that wanted to, they got something out of it. So, I just think that's important to. And they still own their pictures. I'm not asking. It's just in that one publication that showcases their work along with mine, showcases their experience along with mine, but they did get something to value out of it in the end. And it'll be the same way this year when I do that magazine again. So I just think it's important that, not only do I preach that, I also practice what I preach, because I'm getting to the point now where I'm using other people's work to showcase what we do here. So.
Mhm. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I want to encourage everybody who's listening, either now or the replay. If one of the things I always try to do is, even beyond this, if you've got questions, if you're kind of on the verge of your first contract or whatever, and you want someone to look at it, I always encourage people, just write down my email address, take time to contact me. I'll walk you through it, because I've got a vested interest in making sure everyone's treated fairly, because if you're treated fairly, then I get treated fairly, because I'm still doing this for a business. So I try to help everybody and mentor as many people as I can to make sure that your work is valued and that you get paid for what you deserve for that work. If a magazine, sees enough value in their work, because they're going to make money off your picture. And so you might as well make money off your picture. And I just try to help people accomplish that. So any other questions at all?
Before you had your farm with the pond that you just built and the nice blind and all, when you went out to look for wildlife, were you shooting from a blind, or were you a portable blind, or were you just lucky to be in the right place at the right time, or what was your approach on that?
Well, so that's an interesting question. I never really thought about it that way. It's really, I mean, I guess some of us are born with innate abilities, but one of the things I learned early on, just because the way I was raised, is I always, I just learned how to get close to animals when I was young, because I always like seeing them up close. I just try to figure out how to get close. And so a lot of my time I would spend just, how do I get closer to animals? So it's really a combination of everything. Every one of the quail pictures that you saw in the presentation that I mocked up for the covers, they were all taken out of the front seat of my pickup, just driving around on the roads real slow, looking for animals. And I still love doing that, just kind of safari style, just driving around looking. A fair amount of them, like all the turkey pictures, were all taken out of blinds. When I used to live out in Childress, Texas, I had I had a turkey roost on my property, and so I built a blind behind my house that we had a few acres. We had 15 acres, but we on that place. But I'd just go sit up in the morning in that blind and wait for the turkeys to come by, and so birds, when it comes to blinds, birds are pretty easy to fool with portable blinds. They're just oblivious to them. So backyard feeders, I mean, right now you can't see it. I did outside the barn 20 feet from here. I did a workshop Saturday, one of my day camp series on hummingbirds. We've got a lot of hummingbirds right now, and they're right there. So it's been kind of a mixture of just trying to figure out how to get closer to animals and what are some things I can do to get animals closer to me, and just sort of a combination of all of it. And part of it is going to places where, I'm always looking for places. I've got a little more freedom now, but when I was younger and couldn't travel as much, I always looking for places where you could get pretty close to animals, and like state parks and national parks where they just weren't afraid. They're used to seeing people. So it's kind of a combination of all of it. I know that's a really vague answer, but that's it's if I need to be more specific, just say so.
No, that's great. Thank you.
No. Anybody else?
Question that's been in the chat.
Oh, I didn't see it. Okay. Let me look. Okay. I see. Okay. It says, I see. I don't think the whole question is there. What would be a base pricing for starting out to get? That's all I can see of the question. So if there's if you could expand on that, I'll answer it. If you're talking about a base price to get started on, like, for magazine photography, usually magazines come up with their own base price. They'll, they base that on circulation. So again, it's like TV shows. The bigger the show, the more money they can command for their ad rates. Magazines are the same way. The bigger the circulation, the more eyeballs that are on their product, the more they can command for ad space. And so usually the bigger the magazine, the more they pay. They usually have a pay schedule on what they're going to pay for stuff. And what I tell everybody is, when you're asking for their photo wants list, ask for their pay scale and see what they pay. And if it's something you're comfortable with, go for it. If you're not, just pass on and do something for somebody else. But typically, I mean, covers, for example, may go anywhere from $50 or $100 for a cover on a really small little local magazine, all the way up to, $2,500, $3,000 for a bigger magazine, and everything in between. So it's kind of if that's the question that I think Greg was asking, then that's the answer to that. If that's not that question you're asking, just feel free to chime in and ask it.
I have a question, Russell. For someone who wants to start out trying to make a living off of, publications, how often do you think and someone I also write as well. So how often do you think you want to be pitching stories versus looking for what's already on their schedule and what images they're looking for?
So whenever I used to do a lot more of it, I was probably pitching to magazines quarterly on just, this is what I've got in mind. What do you think? And a lot of times they, and I'm finding this out. I just got asked to write a story for a magazine I pitched 2 years ago to them. A lot of times it may not be no, it's just no for right now. And if they like the idea, they'll hang on to it and reach out to you later about it. I wish they would tell me that sometimes, but they don't. But sometimes it's just out of the blue, unexpected, that magazines will reach out to me. And so as you pitch more stories, I think that the key thing is, it's like any other business. The more you pitch, the more you're kind of putting that stuff out there, the more they think about you when it comes time to start making decisions. And for me, that was really one of my primary goals, is whenever magazines start thinking about, we got this assignment we need to do, or we're looking for these pictures, or we need someone to write this story. I always imagine in my head, and this is just maybe my imagination, I always imagined there for a while, because I was staying so busy with it, that I was the first person they were thinking about, because they knew, and this is where I tried to get, and this is where I still am today with some magazines. I don't do as much magazine work now, but I still do it. I want them to think about me first, because they know, and again, it's all in the interest of making their job easier. They know if we go to Russell, he's going to write a top quality magazine story, and he's going to provide us top quality images. And so that saves us the work from having to get him to write it and then turn around and go find someone else to shoot pictures, or or get someone else to write it that we might have to edit the heck out of just to make it readable, and then still get someone else to go out and take the pictures. So I always tried to work hard enough to where, at least in my mind, I'm one of the top people they think about when they start thinking about who needs to do work for them. And to get to that point, it just takes pitching a lot, every quarter, and it may not be, and I would have a schedule. I mean, I would have it scheduled out that, like every Friday, for example, or every other Friday, whatever it was, that some magazine gets a pitch from you, or every Monday morning, whenever it was, they'd get a pitch, and I'd have sort of a loose outline of half a dozen stories to say, hey, I've looked at your back issues, just prove I've done my homework. Looks like these story ideas may fit what you're looking for. What do you think? Give me your feedback, and just wait to hear back from them. So, and again, that goes back to what I said about it becomes a business after a while, because like every business, Muhammad, I know you've got your business. When you reached out to me a couple of weeks ago, you've got your business, and I know there's some degree of marketing you've got to do to make your business sustainable as you do it now. And that's the same way with kind of how I do it too. I mean, it's just some amount of whenever everybody gets, and I know if you're on the list, you get it. Whenever you get some kind of email from Russell at hackberryfarmtexas.com, that's Russell's attempt to just say, hey, I'm still relevant. Think of me. If you get ready to go somewhere, just think of me. We've got something great to offer you here. So that's just part of the doing business. The pharmaceutical companies do it all the time. We see their ads on everything on TV now. The automobile companies do it all the time. Every company is just in the mindset of we've got to constantly market. If there's a guy named Grant Cardone who writes a bunch of business books, and I read one time called the 10X Factor, I think is what he calls it. Anyway, he's talking about you need to decide where you want to be on marketing messages through social media and then through other email and other channels. And he said, then be 10 times that. He said, because if people start complaining that you're marketing too much, then at least they're paying attention to you at that point. And I'm not quite going to go that far, but I say that to kind of underscore the fact that it can't be a one time or once a year. You want to do it enough where people will remember you and remember what your skill set is, and think about you when it's time to start making decisions.
And do you pitch, like if you have a story that you're working on, do you pitch it one magazine at a time, wait for them to say no to move on to another magazine, or do you simultaneously pitch them?
I do now, because a long time ago I was pitching the same story to different magazines, and then I got the same 2 different magazines from Texas wanting the same story in the same month. So I had to try to figure that one out, and it didn't. I'm not going to say I burned a bridge forever, but I burned a bridge for that day when I had to have those conversations. And so now what I've done is, I've got a relationship with a lot of these editors now that I can ask this. I'll tell them, if I send them a list of ideas, just tell me the ones you don't want to use, and that way I can, you get first dibs at them, and then that way I can take those ideas and try to find another home for them. And I think that's a fair ask to do.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Anybody else? Golly, we're almost half an hour late from finishing up, but I told you I'd stick with you as long as you wanted me to. If no one else has any other questions, if you do, chime in right now. If you don't have any other questions, I'm looking at the chat. I don't see anything else coming through. But again, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you found this of some value. Again, everybody can do it. You just got to put in the time and effort to identify what the market is and try to exploit that market as best you can with your skill set. And if you need any additional mentoring along the way, feel free to reach out to me, ask the question. I'm always glad to help. In the meantime, later on today, you will find you'll get an email with a video replay. I'll put the video on it where the QR code did not work. I'll put that in there, as well as the meeting notes from this meeting. So you'll have just a written summary of what all we talked about today that kind of help you out. So anyway, with that, I'm going to say bye. I'm about to go get on the tractor for a little bit and tell everybody appreciate it, and holler at me anytime. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.